Economic hurdles are the price Russia is paying for protecting its sovereignty. That's the message from Vladimir Putin at his end-of-year Q&A session. Well, the ruble continues its rollercoaster ride despite a brief reprieve ahead of the Russian president's news conference. And also this Thursday, confusion reigns in Washington as the State Department claims Barack Obama has signed off on new sanctions against Russia, which is news to the White House. Hello, you're watching RT International, come to you live from Moscow, where it's now 5 p.m. in the Russian capital. It's good to have you with us. The Russian bear doesn't want to be a stuffed animal. The words of Vladimir Putin during his annual news conference in Moscow.
Sometimes I think to myself, maybe our bear needs to sit quietly, eat his berries and honey. Maybe he'll just be left alone. No, they will always be trying to put him on a chain. And as soon as they do that, they will tear out his teeth and claws.
Well, RT's Murat Gazdiev was listening to the president's speech and reports on who Putin believes wants to put the Russian bear in chains.
The president did dedicate some time to the split between Russia and the West, the sanctions, the threats, the rhetoric. He said it is all an attempt to punish Russia for its independence. He says that the Crimean crisis was not the cause; it was just an excuse for these sanctions, which are aimed at getting Russia to back off from standing up for sovereignty, for its governance.
It's about us protecting our independence, our sovereignty, our right to existence. 25% of the problems in our country are due to the influence of foreign sanctions. Do we want to fight through and restructure our economy, become more independent? Or do we want our skin hung on the wall? This is the choice we have, and it's not about Crimea.
Another big theme was the fall of the ruble, the economy. The president sees in this a chance to diversify the Russian economy away from energy and fossil fuels. He says that previously what happened was investors would come in and they would almost exclusively set up oil rigs, drill for gas, because it was so profitable. You start pumping the oil, pumping the gas, and it's huge profits because the energy prices were so high. That is no longer the case. The president hopes now, with government help, that the business sectors, the manufacturing sectors and industries will flourish. In fact, he was quite optimistic as to the future.
Well, to recap some of the main points made by the Russian president, he said Russia's current economic troubles were caused by factors outside the country. The president offered reassurance that it would take a maximum of 2 years for Russia to recover from the crisis. On the cooling in relations with the West, he said the process has been going on since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And addressing the ongoing crisis in Ukraine, he reiterated that Moscow is prepared to participate in peace efforts as a mediator. Putin also talked about Russia's relations with China, insisting the two states share many interests and together can help bring stability to the global stage. Well, the ruble showed some slight signs of recovery right before the Russian leader's news conference, but the currency remains volatile. Let's get more now from Medina Kochnova, who's watching the situation for us and for RT International. Medina, how's the ruble been responding then to the president's speech today?
Right. Well, here at the Moscow Exchange, the overall trend is rather positive. The volumes of trade are higher than usual. But of course, I have to mention that the volatility still remains on the market. The volatility is still here. Now, as for the ruble, the Russian currency has bounced back, but just a little bit, just around half a ruble. And at the moment, it is trading at around 61 to the dollar and 75 to the euro. However, just as you mentioned, the situation was rather different this morning when the Russian currency rallied in early trading, with the ruble trading at 58 to the dollar and 72 to the euro. Now, in terms of the Russian stocks, pretty much all stocks are in rebound at the moment, with the country's two main indices, the RTS and the MI6, both in the positive territory and continue their growth. Now, the RTS has increased over over 7% within this trading day, and the MI6 is also following in the footsteps and has increased over 5%. And now experts are saying that the ruble has strengthened due to a number of factors, including, of course, the country's central bank's recent anti-crisis package that was released just this Wednesday. Of course, it had quite a serious stabilizing effect on the market. Then the central bank's recent move to increase the key interest rate to 17%. That was also quite a contributing factor to the overall positive trend. And we need to mention a modest recovery in global oil prices. That is also quite a factor. Experts are still saying that it is too early to talk about the situation stabilizing, and we really need to be ready to face continuous volatility on the market, and this is indeed exactly what's happening, as we do see a strong volatility on the market.
Medina, thank you very much for bringing us up to date here on RT International. Now let's go live to London, and Rodney Shakespeare, an economic expert and a professor of binary economics, joins us now. Thank you very much for your time here on RT International. Now the ruble was pretty flat throughout the president's speech. Now does this mean it's reached a point of stability, or is it far too early to tell?
It is reaching the point of stability, and I am much more optimistic than President Putin. Russia has vast natural reserves. It has foreign reserves of over $400 billion. And wait for it, its government expenditure is less than its government income. And contrast that with all the governments in the West who are building up unrepayable levels of debt. And there are two other points to make, which is firstly that Russia and China will soon be implementing the first stages of an alternative banking system. And when that gets suddenly announced, you wait and you hear the Western governments scream that it's all unfair. The other point is that in this particular situation, if Russia needs advice, it may well decide to go to Malaysia. In 1998, in a similar situation, the Americans tried to smash the independence of Malaysia. And Prime Minister Mahathir, together with his key advisor, Tan Sri Nur Muhammad Yaakob, they stood up and they found the way to defy the West. And 3 years later, the IMF was grovelling along the ground in an apology. And the time will be coming quite soon, perhaps under 2 years, when the IMF and the Americans will be having to apologize to Russia.
So you think, I mean, Vladimir Putin says the worst case scenario is that the economy will be bouncing back within 2 years. You think that is the worst case scenario then?
Well, if he said worst case, I said I'm more optimistic. So yes, the worst case is that. The overall context, of course, is that the decline in the oil price represents recognition of what is happening in the global financial system, which is now maladjusted and malformed because it relies on the endless building up of debt. And that debt is not only government debt, it is private debt and it is corporation debt. And those levels are unrepayable. And so is the rich-poor division. And the actual underlying facts are much worse than it was in 1929 and indeed in 2007. Russia relatively will be coming out of the situation much stronger than the Western economies. So I'm rather more optimistic. The overall scene, though, represents a great failure of Western global finance capitalism.
You mentioned that you're optimistic because of Russia's reserves, but they are eating into those reserves, aren't they, to try and stabilise the ruble at the moment?
Yes, but there is a point there. I mentioned the name of Tan Sri Nur Muhammad Yaakob. In this situation, there may be a need for a temporary period of capital controls. That man is the one who knows the technicalities. And I said, when they did this and they resisted the Western pressures, because these market movements are ultimately reflecting the political view, which is the West wishes to smash the independence of Russia. And on that, President Putin is exactly right. But if there is a period of trouble, they go to that man for the technical advice, and they do what Malaysia did in 1998. They stood up and they defied Wall Street and they defied the City of London.
You talk about the politics behind this. Europe has signed off on a new set of sanctions over Crimea. I mean, is this going to put Russia in more trouble, do you think?
Well, Europe, of course, are creepy, crawly minions of the USA, and what a mistake. The only effect of the sanctions, in fact, is to rebound on Europe. And we look at how Russia doesn't start talking, it just acts. The South Stream gas project has been cut. And over 400, 500 million, a huge amount of agricultural products have now been denied to European producers. Europe is making a great mistake. They are following only the interests of Wall Street and the neocon establishment, which always wish to dismantle countries and to put them apart. They're trying to do this to Russia. Well, they're going to fail. Power is moving eastward. Power is moving in the economic power is. Political power is moving towards the east. And the West is suddenly going to find that they are going to have egg on their face, and they are making a great big mistake.
Rodney Shakespeare, our economic expert and professor of binary economics. Thank you very much for your thoughts here on RT International.
Okay.
Well, Barack Obama has approved a bill paving the way for more sanctions against Russia. That's according to a State Department spokesman answering a question from RT.
About the sanctions bill that President Obama is about to sign, as I understand.
He signed it yesterday.
Well, the fact, however, appears to be news to the White House, as Garnet Chichikan explains.
Media reports, however, which came out after that statement at the State Department, quote an unnamed source in the administration saying that the president has not signed the bill yet. At this point, it's not a matter of whether he will sign it, but when, because the White House already said the president intended to do that. This bill gives President Obama the authority to impose further sanctions against Russia, but as we understand, he may choose not to do that. With the previous rounds of sanctions, it was the administration itself imposing them, and that was different. But a bill simply authorizes the president to take certain measures. For example, this bill also authorizes the president to send $350 million worth of arms and military equipment to Ukraine. I asked the State Department spokesperson whether the U.S. is going to do that, and she said the U.S. is not currently providing lethal weapons to Ukraine, and that policy has not changed. So maybe the White House will put this bill on a shelf and never remember about it. But based on the previous rounds of sanctions and the statements that we hear, the White House is pursuing a course of sanctions and isolation toward Russia.
Well, it took the US half a century to realize that sanctions against Cuba don't work. Now, President Obama says Washington is extending a hand of friendship to Havana. But there's a big gap to bridge if we look back at relations between the two countries over the decades. Well, in 1960, America slapped an economic embargo on Cuba. It was followed by a breakdown of diplomatic relations a year later. In 1963, the US imposed a ban on travel and financial transactions with the island. Those restrictions were tightened by the Bush administration 40 years later. But in 2009, Obama lifted a ban on family travel to Cuba and eased cash flow restrictions. International consultant Adrian Salbucci believes America wants to restore ties with Cuba because Washington is losing power in the region.
I think that this is a sign, yet another one, of growing a U.S. weakness, not just as a global power, but also throughout Latin America. And that weakness is expressed basically in a very, I would say, fundamental loss of credibility. The fact that this is being done now is clearly good news, but it also shows maybe the waning of power of the Cuban exiles that live in the United States, notably in Cuba, who have very important financial clout and who can also influence the vote. So I think that, in a way, it's a sign that we are moving in the right direction, but it will also be interpreted well by many people in Latin America and also as a sign of weakness.
Coming up shortly, Sony Pictures cancelled the release of a new film amid threats of attacks. US investigators have linked cyber attacks to North Korea because the movie involves a plot to kill the country's leader, Kim Jong-un. Also, whatever the weather, this father guarantees his kids make it to school. We talk to the proud military enthusiast later in the programme.
They decide what you eat, what you drink, which drugs you use, and you agree.
It's all about limiting your choices. The government wants to make those choices for you. They want to take away your freedom to choose.
They set standards, and you follow them.
A few companies control everything. There's only a small group of agribusiness companies that control the entire food production.
It always, always, always hurts small producers and helps the large producers.
Do they care about our safety or about theirs?
Just to be in the business of reselling food others have already manufactured and put in the marketplace.
Is it freedom or
a military enthusiast in the UK has hit on an unusual way of making sure his children get to school on time. Well, Nick Mead drops his children off at class in a 17-ton tank, one of his fleet of 120 military vehicles worth over €2.5 million. He runs an events company called Tanks a Lot, and we asked him why he decided to make the mundane school run a little more fun for his kids.
They love it. I don't mind taking them to school, but it's never good picking them up from school, because then you get about 15 more kids who all want to be dropped off, and it can turn into a very long journey. It's always a good reaction, actually. Lots of sort of waving and cheering, and people like them. It's very rare that you get some kind of grim look. For the little bit of time you lose in a traffic jam, you make up where people let you out. Not that they feel menaced, they just want to see the tank closer. And we do corporate days and all sorts of things, from kids' parties to stag days to private car crushes, everything you can think of. I've even got a tank hearse, I've got two welded together into a tank limo, I've got a pink one for gays, you name it, we've got a tank for it.
A Florida couple has won a $1 million lawsuit after a major US bank bombarded them with harassing collection calls for 4 years.
Saturday, 7:41 a.m. This is Michael with Bank of America.
Please call Bank of America Home Loans. Please give us a call at your earliest convenience.
Well, this is what the Coniglio family was subjected to several times a day when they fell behind on their house repayments. They sent cease and desist letters asking the Bank of America to stop the calls, but when that failed, they turned to the courts earlier this year. The Bank of America has now been ordered to pay a sum which works out at $1,500 for every single call. The family's lawyer, Jason Placeras, believes this case should be a wake-up call for other debt collectors.
They want to collect money, and that's why they continue to call. Banks and debt collectors harass people by calling them 5, 10, 20, 30 times a day, because they know that a lot of people will just pay to make them go away, to make the harassment stop. Gave a press release where they said we were just trying to help, but if they were really trying to help, they should have stopped calling, because that's what my clients wanted them to do. Now, once they got hit with $1 million, I think they got the message. They finally stopped calling.
Online, a new way to earn money. In Qatar, you can get $1 an hour for watching a football match. So, why does a nation with a passion for sport have to pay to fill its stadiums? Our website, rt.com, has got the story. Also there, a mysterious Egyptian cemetery with 1 million bodies leaves scientists at a loss. Find out more about what lies under the sand online. And to some other world news now in brief. In northeastern Nigeria, Boko Haram militants have attacked a village. The Islamists killed a reported 32 people and kidnapped scores of others. More than 2,000 have fallen victim to attacks blamed on the group so far this year. And India has successfully launched a 630-ton rocket into space, its largest ever. It can carry heavy communication satellites, which means India will no longer have to rely on foreign launches. An unmanned capsule capable of carrying 2 or 3 astronauts into space was also on board. India is gaining ground among nations exploring space with a range of missions, including the launch of a satellite into Mars orbit in September. The release of the movie The Interview has been cancelled after the filmmakers Sony Pictures fell victim to hackers. US investigators are linking to North Korea. The film is a comedy involving a fictional CIA plot to assassinate the North Korean leader.
Mr. Rappaport, I'm Agent Lacey with Central Intelligence. You two are going to be in a room alone with Kim, and the CIA would love it if you could take him out. Take him out.
For coffee? Dinner? For kimchi?
No, take him out.
You want us to kill the leader of North Korea?
Yes.
Well, hackers calling themselves Guardians of Peace have threatened to attack American cinemas showing the film. They also leaked Sony's private data revealing that the movie was shown to US State Department officials who gave it their blessing. Lindsay France has all the details.
The holiday season has not been merry or bright here at Sony Pictures. First, it was hacked on November 24th, and now in an unprecedented move, it's canceled its Christmas Day release of the film The Interview. This comes after the 3 largest cinema chains in the U.S., Regal, AMC, and Cinemark, decided to pull out of screening the film, claiming threats of terrorism were received from the hackers, that dire consequences to viewers could follow if the film was debuted. For its part, Regal cited wavering support of the film and the ambiguous nature of the threats. So it decided to delay the opening of the film in its theaters. Now, the movie depicts an attempt to kill North Korea's dictator, Kim Jong-un. The 2 actors in the film, Seth Rogen and James Franco, have never stated that they regret making this film. In June, North Korea called on the U.S. government to block the film's release or face a decisive and merciless countermeasure. Pretty much what the hackers have also claimed. But not many expected such decisive action to be taken by Sony in the interest of public or customer safety. And it's not the first time such international reaction has been received from a film. Back in 2012, a movie about Mohammed depicted the prophet in a less than favorable light and sparked deadly protests in Libya, Egypt, and elsewhere. But in this instance, federal officials are now taking seriously the possibility that in retaliation for the interview, North Korea could be behind the massive cyber attack and threats at Sony. In Los Angeles, Lindsay France, RT.
Coming up next, a documentary exploring whether consumers have the freedom of choice that they think they have. Stay with us.